1970s, one 6-foot 9-inch man named Edmund Kemper towered over his peers, and many considered him to be a gentle giant. No one in his life could imagine he could kill 16 teenage girls hitchhiking through Santa Cruz, California, or that he would finally turn his rage to his own mother. No one in Kemper's life ever got bad vibes, and he didn't show many signs that there was anything actually wrong with him. In fact, he had a genius-level IQ, and he was the kind of person you'd imagine having a fascinating conversation with over a cup of tea. He was so likable that no one would have guessed that he was capable of killing a total of 10 people and defiling their corpses. He covered his tracks so well that he would have never been caught if he hadn't picked up the phone and turned himself in. This is Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer. In 1948, Edmund Kemper was born in Burbank, California. He was a sensitive and intelligent child. He idolized his father, and he often enjoyed hanging out with him. Edmund showed many sociopathic traits growing up. He was a pyromaniac, often setting small fires. He decapitated and enacted sexual rituals on his sister's dolls. He also enjoyed killing small animals such as cats. Ed's mother was very strict, and she tended to reprimand him often. He was the middle child of 2 sisters. He often received more love from his mother than his sisters did. When he was 9 years old, his parents got a divorce. Him, his mother, and his 2 sisters moved to Montana. His mother got remarried, however that marriage did not work, and then she had various boyfriends, and those didn't work either. Ed unfortunately had no real male role models in his life. His mother had this anger towards men, and she believed that all men were worthless. She took out this anger she had on Ed. Ed and his sisters had to rely on their imaginations for entertainment, as their mother couldn't afford to buy them toys. Ed took a liking in reading. He read many books about history. He enjoyed ones about Vikings and the Holocaust. Him and his sisters began playing a game called Gas Chamber, and they would sit in a room and pretend that they were in a gas chamber. They all had bedrooms upstairs, and at one point his mother decided to move Ed to the basement, as she was convinced that he would hurt his sisters. In his room in the basement, he only had a cot, 1 light bulb, and his only company were rats. It was damp, and it was cold down there. He believed that his mom had a deeper meaning behind her actions of moving him to the basement. He thought, why am I going to the basement? I'm going to hell. They're going to heaven. Edmund's incredible height always made him seem much older than he was. He started driving at just the young age of 10. One day he went to a carnival, and there was a game there where people slid their head into a guillotine and pretended to have their heads cut off. He saw this as a strange contradiction, that people would laugh and squeal at the face of death. This, however, excited him, and he wished for it to be real. He began having delusions, and he was having a hard time knowing what was real and what was not. When he was 13 years old, his relationship with his mother began to suffer. He ran away to LA to live with his dad and his new stepmom. This reunion, however, only lasted for a few months. He moved to live with his grandparents in a remote farm. He was very isolated from the rest of the world. His grandma was domineering and abusive, just as his mother was, and his grandpa had dementia. His grandparents allowed him to use a rifle to hunt rabbit, raccoons, and squirrels. However, when his grandma left the house, she would take the rifles away from him. Everything went very well in the house for about 1.5 years, and then he went to visit his mother after 2 years. His mother knew just how to get to him. She knew how to trigger him, and she pushed every button to make him feel worthless. This visit with his mother made his illusions come back, and all the progress he had made with his mental health was suddenly lost. Upon returning to his grandparents' house, he returned into a delusional mental state. On August 27, 1964, Edmund and his grandmother got into an argument just like they always did. However, this time it was deadly. Edmund shot his grandmother in the back of the head, and then he killed his grandpa, saying, "I don't want you to live with the pain of knowing that your wife was murdered." When his delusional state began to subside and reality hit, he saw his grandparents lying dead on the ground. He could have easily left and escaped, but instead he decided to call his mom and ask what to do. She said to call the police and turn himself in, so that's what he did. When asked why he did this, He had only the simple answer of, "I wanted to see what it would be like to kill Grandma." Edmund Kemper was only 15 when he murdered his grandparents. For his crimes, he was handed over to the California Youth Authority. He underwent a variety of tests which determined that he had a genius level IQ, but he also suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Kemper was eventually sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. In 1969, Kemper was released at the age of 21. Despite his prison doctor's recommendations that he not live with his mother because of her past abuse and his psychological issues involving her, he rejoined her in Santa Cruz, California, where she had moved after ending her third marriage to take a job with the University of California in Santa Cruz. Edmund's childhood was very conservative, as he was raised by very conservative parents, and then his teen years he spent in a mental hospital. So when he was released at the age of 21, and he was thrown into a free love and hippie culture that was going on in the 60s in California, he was shocked. He felt very awkward and uncomfortable, and he could barely hold a conversation with a girl. He went on his first date when he was 21. They went to Denny's and then to a John Wayne movie. He felt awkward. He didn't smoke pot, he didn't listen to music, and he didn't go to parties like everyone else did in the 1960s and 70s. His mother had raised him saying all men were awful people. She worked at UC Santa Cruz with all female students. In many ways, his mother was a feminist who truly despised men. Having this shoved in his face his whole life made him despise his mother, which he then projected on other women. He did have fantasies of being with women, but he didn't have fantasies of being in a relationship with a woman. Soon after Ed was released, he found a job at the California Highway Department. He got his own apartment, and he had an independent life away from his mom. However, a little while after, he found himself in financial trouble and had to move back in with his mom. The two got into intense fights on a daily basis, and it made the situation worse. Ed would drive and drive and drive and drive. He picked up a habit of picking up hitchhikers, which was quite common in the 60s and 70s among college students. They would hold signs up saying the location of where they wanted to go. Ed created this fantasy in his mind of picking up young women and killing them. He would practice picking up both male and female hitchhikers and then let them go free. He did this over 150 times so he could prepare for any scenario. On May 7, 1972, Edmund Kemper's fantasy was realized. He picked up two 18-year-old girls named Mary Ann Pesky and Anita Lucheski in Berkeley, California. They asked for a ride to Stanford University, but instead he drove them to a secluded area in the woods, and he locked Anita in the truck and stabbed and strangled Mary. Then he got Anita from the truck and killed her in the same way. Once they were dead, he raped them and stuffed their bodies into the truck of his Ford Galaxy. He later then dismembered their bodies, put them in bags, and put the bags miles apart in order to throw off the police. On September 14, 1972, he picked up 15-year-old Aoki Ku, who needed a ride to ballet, and he killed her in the same fashion as the other two girls. On January 7, 1973, he killed Cindy Shaw, but instead of disposing her remains like the other girls, he buried her head in the yard facing toward his mother's window. Cindy's head was sitting in the trunk of his car when he went to his state-mandated therapy session. On February 5, 1973, Edward and his mother got into an intense argument. He then went and killed two more girls, Rosaline Thorpe and Allison Liu. He finally had made the connection that the anger he felt towards his mother triggered him on his killing sprees. He knew that if he wanted this killing to stop, that he needed to kill his mother. The killing of his mother was to be put on hold when the police showed up at the Kemper residence. A few days earlier, the police received a tip that Ed had purchased a gun. The shop owner saw Ed's personal record had been expunged and that he had committed a murder when he was under 18. The shop owner reported it to the police and gave them his name and his address. When the police showed up, they recognized Ed from the jury room. a bar that the police and Ed had all hung out at together. They assured Ed that this was just a formality. Ed led them to a closet where he kept several guns. Next to those weapons was a woman's purse and mementos filled up by his victims. Before the cops noticed, he distracted them and took them out to his car where he had more hidden weapons. They did not suspect him of being the murderer, but he was extremely paranoid and he was convinced that the cops were onto him. In April 1973, Kemper committed what would be his last two murders. On Good Friday, he went to his mother's home where the two had a very unpleasant exchange. Kemper attacked his mother after she went to sleep. He first struck her in the head with a hammer and then cut her throat with a knife. As he had done with his other victim, he then decapitated her and cut off her hands, but he then removed her larynx and put it down the garbage disposal. After hiding his mother's body parts, Kemper called his mother's friend, Sally Hallett, and invited her over to the house. Kemper then strangled Hallett shortly after she arrived and hid her body in a closet. Kemper fled the area the next day, driving east until he reached Pablo, Colorado, where on April 23rd he made a call to the Santa Cruz police to confess to his crimes. At first, they did not believe that the guy that they knew as Big Ed was a killer. But during subsequent interrogations, he would lead them to all the evidence that they needed to prove that he was, in fact, the infamous co-ed killer. In October of 1973, Kemper went on trial for his crimes. He was sentenced to 10 accounts of first-degree murder. He was found guilty of all charges in early November. When asked by the judge what he thought his punishment should be, Kemper said that he should be tortured to death, but instead he will be spending his life in prison. In his time behind bars, he has shown a sense of remorse for his crimes, and he's assisted on the research on the psychology of serial killers by agreeing to do audio and video interviews. He's begun to teach classes in computer literacy and has read audiobooks for the blind. The inglorious atrocities of Edmund Kemper demonstrates just how loathsome the actions of a serial killer can be. Although the abuse he suffered during childhood was tragic and terrible, and while it offers some insights into his criminal pathology, Kemper's odyssey of murder, dismemberment, and sexual perversion still defies comprehension.